Hello and welcome to Burris Agronomy U. This is Matt Montgomery, Sales Agronomist with Burris. Today's topic is a pretty important one. It's a reminder for growers that the use of some OP insecticides may require that a grower not use certain herbicides. There are some really good reasons to use soil insecticides. Some individuals are using soil insecticides in an attempt to slow down Bt resistance development, the resistance to rootworm corn. In particular, we've encouraged growers to use this strategy where the risk of resistance development in corn rootworms appears to be high. We've noted that growers might consider using a soil insecticide if the risk is high, but that they should monitor beetle populations, root injury, etc., to determine if an insecticide really still is needed the following growing season. Other growers use soil insecticides to depress secondary subterranean insect pressure as well. Soil insecticides, organophosphate materials, and other materials are therefore really important tools that really do have a place in row crop production. Now that said, growers should remember that there are sometimes harmful synergistic interactions when the use of certain insecticides coincides with the use of certain herbicides. We primarily worry about a bad interaction between organophosphate insecticides, OP insecticides, and ALS and/or HPPD inhibitor herbicides. This is just a list of some commonly used soil insecticides. Again, all are very good products, and if a grower is going to use a soil insecticide, any of these could and should be considered. We've provided a brief review as to which products are OP materials in this slide. Now, we are not going to list out all the many different types of ALS and HPPD type products. We're providing the active ingredients of such materials here. We would encourage the grower to read over the label of any herbicide product considered for use on the farm to see if that label cites restrictions should an OP insecticide be used. There's no Cliff Notes version or approach to highlighting the potential problem here. Growers have to read the label. Let's take a second, though, to review ALS injury and HPPD injury symptoms. Now, ALS materials inhibit an enzyme needed to form amino acids in the plant. Think of amino acids as the building blocks inside the plant, and you can begin to guess some ALS injury symptoms. The lack of building blocks causes corn to be stunted and causes roots to look like bottle brushes. Some yellowing and purpling is also common. HPPD materials inhibit an enzyme called HPPD that's needed to form pigment in the plant. On the left, you see what drifting looks like, and on the right, you see something a little more similar to what carryover injury might look like. Now, both these materials translocate in the plant. That's just a fancy way of saying that both these materials move around inside the plant. They don't just damage tissue that's exposed to the herbicide, they soak in and move around within the plant's vascular system. That means they eventually wander around until they reach meristematic tissue. And that's just a fancy way of saying that these products eventually make their way to the growing point. This is just a crude drawing of a young corn plant. The arrow points to the growing point from which leaves and ears will develop, or the meristem. The meristem is the point at which cells are produced, so it's a pretty important part of the plant. And this is a rough depiction of what a meristem kind of looks like under an electron microscope. Now, because this part of the plant is so important, again, cells are being generated at this point, it's not surprising that the plant has some defense mechanisms that protect the growing point. One of those defense mechanisms is this fella, cytochrome P450. Now, this little enzyme has many different jobs in the plant, but one of those jobs is to protect the growing point, to protect the meristem. It's responsible for blocking foreign material that might hurt the meristem. If you like to look over the shorthand for chemical reactions, the reaction at the bottom tells you how cytochrome P450 works. Now, for the rest of us, let's just simplify what's going on here. Let's look at how this little enzyme interacts with ALS and/or HPPD type herbicides. Basically, the enzyme helps stick some oxygen and hydrogen onto the herbicide. That produces some water and also transforms the herbicide into a new critter, a new molecule that won't hurt the plant or its growing point. Now this helps explain why some crops aren't injured when ALS and HPPD herbicides are applied to them. If they aren't injured, they have more of this enzyme than do the weeds. The herbicide is there, it still gets into the plant, but because the crop has lots of these enzymes, it breaks down. It metabolizes the herbicide before it can injure tissue arising from the growing point. The next few slides help display this graphically. Remember, this is a simplification, but it gives you the general idea of what's going on. So here's the plant. Let's call it a crop. I'm not sure what kind of crop this would be actually. And you can see that this crop is full of that little enzyme we were talking about. It's all the tannish brown squiggly shapes in the plant. Now we spray the plant with herbicide. Herbicide molecules are represented by the red dots, and the enzymes close in to chew it up. Eventually, the enzymes metabolize the herbicide. Because the herbicide has been metabolized, the plant is now safe from injury. Remember, this is a rough representation of what happens. There are actually more steps, and we actually are converting the herbicide into a different molecule that doesn't injure the plant. Sometimes a sugar is being stuck onto that thing with the whole package being incorporated into the cell or exported from it, but you get the general idea. Now, when we introduce an OP insecticide to the equation, everything changes. And it changes because the OP insecticide is also metabolized by the same enzyme we mentioned earlier. Cytochrome P450 interacts with the OP insecticide. In other words, the limited amount of that enzyme in the plant must now do double duty. The enzyme literally gets overwhelmed because there's too much work for it to do. Let's display this graphically. So here we have the crop, and it has the same number of enzymes as before. We're also applying the same amount of herbicide as before. If you were able to, you could count the number of red dots, herbicide dots. You would find that they were the same number as the first time. However, we've also introduced the OP insecticide, which is represented by the yellow dots. The enzymes are now facing more work. And watch what happens. You see that the enzyme was forced to now metabolize the insecticide as well. It still metabolized some of the herbicide, lots of the herbicide actually, but the presence of the OP insecticide overwhelmed the plant's defenses. There's still active herbicide, molecules capable of damaging tissue generated at the growing point left in this plant. The plant normally is able to metabolize this rate of herbicide, but now we pushed its defenses, the defenses that we rely on, over the edge. This is why growers must read their herbicide label, making sure that the product they have decided to use is compatible with the insecticide they have chosen. Make sure you do that research now. Make sure you avoid injury by doing a little research today. Thanks for watching. And stay tuned for more agronomic information on Burris Agronomy U.